We're now moving on to our session just before lunch, and it's on lab innovations. So have you ever wondered if you could visualize text, interact with your numbers, and maybe play with all of your data to make sense of it? We will show you how in the next session. It's all exciting and it's called Lab Innovations. The demonstration is going to be chaired by Sophie Yohani. Sophie is a psychologist and professor of counseling psychology in the Faculty of Education at the University of Alberta. She's also a member of the Immigrant Health and Wellbeing team. Over to you, Sophie.
Thank you. Thank you, Martha. I hope you had a good coffee break and ready for, as Martha said, some exciting information now. So we're switching things a little bit now because now we'll have a chance to actually enter into people's lab spaces and learn firsthand what's actually happening. So we're moving away from the conversations we've had now to actually experience, and perhaps some of you have actually experimented a little bit as I did with VR yesterday. So I have with me my co-chair, Radin Hamid Harad, and he's currently pursuing his PhD in computer engineering at Toronto Metropolitan University. So he's here with me, managing the online audience. And our two presenters today are Dr. Bilal Farooq and Dr. Ali Mazalek. Bilal Farooq is Canada Research Chair in Disruptive Transportation Technologies and Services, an Associate Professor at Toronto Metropolitan University. He's also founding director of the Laboratory of Innovations in Transportation, LiTrans, and a researcher for Bridging Divides. Ali Mazalek is professor and Canada Research Chair in Digital Media and Innovation, also at TMU, as well as founder and director of the Synesthetic Media Lab. She's also connected to Georgia Institute of Technology and a researcher for Bridging Divides. So we'll have two presentations, and then after they have presented, we will come on stage and have a time of your engagement with questions directly asking them about their work and the research that they will be presenting. So we'll first have Bilal will come forward and talk to us about extended reality and digital twins in migration behavior studies, lessons from travel demand modeling. Welcome, Bilal.
Thank you for being here for the presentation. My presentation is about the kind of work that we have been doing for the past 10 years or so in terms of the use of VR, AR, or in general, XR, extended reality technologies for understanding human behavior in the context of travel behavior. And I'll build a case why we started this, and then I'll try to move towards how the same tools can be used for migration studies and give you a bit of a kind of a plan. Okay, so just to give you a very one sentence work that we do, we work at the nexus of technology, policy, and behavior modification. We are interested in new technologies, in transportation systems specifically, and we are trying to adapt them in a way such that they can be adopted in a sustainable manner. And for that, bringing in the policy side, bringing in the behavior change side, that is always very important for us. So this is the kind of focal point that we use for our research. And if you look at the work that I've been doing, this is more important. Okay, so the work that I've been doing through my Canada Research Chair, it is looking at how disruptive transportation technologies and services can be adapted, and not just from the technological point of view, but also from the behavior and policy point of view as well. And whenever there's a behavior, we need to observe that behavior, and that observation of the behavior, we have some typical ways of observing behavior. For instance, in travel demand modeling, the basic way we observe behavior is to look at census data, look at the kind of information that is available in census data to understand human behavior, which mode they are taking, where are they commuting, why are they commuting, and so on. And in addition to that, usually municipalities, they would collect travel surveys that are, again, revealed preference surveys that happen every 5 year or 10 year, and in which these residents are asked about their travel behavior. If you try to answer questions related to, let's say, driverless vehicles or sidewalk robots or urban air mobility through these means, that is just not possible because there is no observation related to it. So then what you do is that you may move towards other types of surveys that are called stated preference surveys. And in stated preference surveys, you create a hypothetical situation, and in that hypothetical situation, you ask people what kind of choices or preferences they would come up with. Again, these are the two main methods, and we wanted to see whether we can do better than that. And that's where the VR comes in. And about 2015, 2016, we tried to explore it, and we tried to look at if we can do better than revealed preference surveys or stated preference surveys when the naturalistic settings are not available. And a few issues that, first of all, the revealed preference side is something that is just not possible because we don't have the observations, but the extended side is the stated preference side is something that may be used and people have used. But the problem with them in these sort of situation is that in case of a technology that is not here yet, a strong reference choice or a strong reference point may not be available. For instance, if I ask you that, would you take the new Ontario line subway or not? So that question instantly in your head, you can imagine a subway that you're getting in and off. You have already done that on line 1 or line 2. But if I ask you whether you are going to take the urban air mobility options for commuting to TMU or not, right? So that's a very different situation. There's no reference there. Your experience with flying with Air Canada, that's not an experience. That's a very different point. So the reference point is missing. Not just that, the experience is also missing. Imagination of that choice is also difficult. What exactly is in that choice? Your imagination might be completely different than my imagination, than third person, and so on. So we want to standardize that imagination as well. A task could be complex as well. If I ask you that, whether you are going to use the Tesla's autopilot or FSD or not, when the situation is such that a car is coming from left-hand side and another car is coming from other side, I have to explain the whole situation to you. You have to imagine the whole situation, and we have to make sure that what I explained to you, you imagined it exactly like that, and then you make the decision, right? So the complexity comes in terms of choice as well. And again, the data as well, that could also be very, very complex that we need. So in this context, since 2015, we have been working on developing an XR setup that is able to create the digital twin of our transportation systems. You saw some of the demos there as well, how the vehicles move, how pedestrians move, and so on. And the physics behind it it's been replicated to as much as reality as possible. At the same time, the 3D environment around it, we use it for several usages, not just observing behavior, but also training technology as well. But here I'll only focus on the data collection part. So the first work that we did, we focused on okay, are we doing better than the existing ways or not? So a stated preference survey usually might be on a piece of paper, or it might be on a web interface or a mobile interface. So it's usually text only. You can also bring in visual aids as well. So we conducted experiments in VR as well as in these using these sort of tools, and we showed that the understanding of the participants of the scenarios is better. Not just that, the model that we get much more consistent and statistically significant parameters out of it. So that was our first approach that we did. I'll give you two brief examples, and that would build a further case in terms of what we are doing. So as I said before, that in case of automation, giving people details about the partial automation that is currently happening in form of FSD or a couple of other options as well. They are called SAE Level 3 automation, Society of Automotive Engineers Level 3 automation, and these are from level 0 to level 5. Level 5 would be a complete automation, where all the tasks can be done by the AI in the vehicle itself. But in level 3, generally the AI can do all the tasks, but you need to stay alert, and you need to stay alert and take back control in situations where it might be such that the AI is not able to figure out what is happening. So here, for us, the driver behavior becomes a lot more important. We want to understand what the driver, how the driver transitions in both directions, giving control to the automation as well as taking back control from the automation, especially in mandatory situations. So in this example, I'll show you the only mandatory situations, but we have done other sites as well. So, for instance, there's an accident happening downstream, and the automation is able to figure out that, oh, there's something wrong down there, but I don't know how to deal with this situation. And it can prompt the driver to take back control, and the driver needs to take back control, slow the vehicle, maneuver into the other lane so as to avoid the accident. Just to show you how it looks like, it would be something like this. Well, in this case, she already took the control, but but you see that what she's seeing is on the display as well. Okay. Yeah, so this is the kind of setup, and we worked on it. And if you recognize her, she also experienced it. And she was pretty excited, as you can see. Okay, so what do we do with them? Once we have these models, then we try to not only just do basic data analysis, but we also try to develop these behavioral models that can give us insights, quantitative insights about the behavior. This is a very complex model. I won't go into details, but I can get some key takeaways from it. For instance, in heavy traffic conditions, actually the the driver was able to take back control much more reliably. They were much more successful in it. And the reason behind it is that in heavy traffic, the general the average speed of the flow was much lower, and the participants, they were already attentive about it, so they were able to take back control. Similarly, in multitasking, we have a way of I might show. Yeah, no, it's not here, but we can simulate For instance, the use of smartphone, a virtual smartphone where the person is able to play games and so on. So in case of multitasking, especially at night, the participants were less likely to take back control, which is, which is understandable. And similarly, there are other insights that we were able to get. And these insights are very useful for car manufacturers, for transportation planners in the municipalities to come up with regulations and so on. So these sort of insights we have already developed in this example. The second example that you saw already yesterday, and it's still available today, is where we look at pedestrian behavior in terms of interactions with automated vehicles. And here we are also able to do not only observe the exact behavior, but also measure their neurophysiological state as well. So in this case, we put in a GSR sensor that can measure their stress levels while they are performing certain experiments as well. And this particular experiment we not only did in Toronto, but we had a version of it for Newcastle as well in the UK. So we have data from Newcastle as well. Again, well, I had to convince her to let me present here, so it took a while. So again, we collected data and we take advantage of the mathematical modeling tools that we have to come up with certain key insights. For instance, we see clear spatial differences between pedestrian crossing performances in Newcastle as well as in Toronto. And it's understandable by the fact that how the average speeds are of the vehicles are in Toronto versus how they are in Newcastle. The width of the lanes are different. All sorts of other differences are there as well. One interesting thing that we found was related to social conformity. In case of social conformity, what we did was that we put in a virtual person in front of the real participant in the simulation, and that virtual person would behave in different ways. Sometimes they would be very risk-taking and try to try to cross the road in a hurry. In the second case, we had much more conservative, and in other case, we just put a pedestrian there and they weren't moving. They were just there. We wanted to see that as well. And I think there was one where there weren't any. So we see that the pedestrian behavior changed pretty significantly with that virtual pedestrian behavior. Yeah, I can go into details later. And things like external human-machine interface. So, for instance, we were able to put in a display in front of each of the automated vehicles that would tell the pedestrian what to do. Simple signals like stop or go or these sort of things. And we were not able to see a lot of differences coming in out of it. Okay, so that's the past work. Last 5 minutes I'll spend on what we can do in migration studies. So with Sandeep, I'm co-leading the place and infrastructure team, and there I'm focusing on understanding migrants' infrastructure needs and preferences in terms of cyber-physical services and infrastructure, whether it's transportation, whether it's housing and so on, neighborhoods, social infrastructure, and so on. And at least it's my perception that a new immigrant's understanding of the new environment, culture, or norms may not be at a level that a person who had lived in a place for several years and so on. And their reference point may be missing or biased. Right? A very simple example is that before I moved here, I moved to Montreal to study at McGill 20 years ago or so. Before moving there, I was working with a big team in Silicon Valley for a while that was remote. So in my head, the perception was very much interacting with those people. And when I came in Montreal, like it was a big cultural shock to me, right? So yeah, so my reference point was very different, or biased in terms of where I'm moving to. So these sort of things may happen. So in that context, I think what we can do is that we can start very simple. We can start with these basically. So this is a cardboard in which there is a smartphone and there's some lens as well. And when people wear them, they see something like this. And they can do this. They can see around, they can enjoy the sky, they can come down, and so on. These are a few of them. They are here as well if you want to experience them. But they can actually, in very 3D sort of experience, they can see what is happening, right? And maybe we can develop, a huge catalog of these sort of 360 videos for Toronto's neighborhood as well as for other places in Canada, and try to develop a stated preference experiment around it. Instead of visual, it will be 3D, and try to collect a very large sample and try to understand what are their preferences. And all this can be internally labeled as well, in the sense that a bank with sign in Chinese or this and that. So all these details can be labeled. And not just that, we can also track where the person is looking and so on. So we are able to see that which details they are looking at. So all these can be a very rich data set that can be used for understanding their neighborhood behavior. Not just that, we also can have a more longitudinal dimension to it, where we can also see once they came here, how they made their preferences and how those preferences changed, right? So that is something that could be brought in as well. And building upon it, then we can develop, a detailed digital twin that can create hypothetical scenarios to ask, what if questions and see how participants behave to those. Just concluding remarks very quickly. It's all the good sides that I showed, but at the same time, I also want to mention that there are several issues that we need to address as well. And one of them is related to the verification, validation issue, where we need to make sure that the kind of results that we are getting, they have good baseline. They are good baseline in the sense that participants are behaving in the same manner in reality as well. Transferability is another dimension. The kind of experiments that we are running here, are they transferable to, let's say, Calgary or somewhere, other places as well. Appropriateness is another dimension that we need to look at. Response accuracy, comparative studies, they all have to be done. Social inclusivity, that's important because, for instance, a person with blindness, so how do we, incorporate those people in our experiments? What are the kind of things that we can do for them? Similarly, there are others as well. I'll stop here because I'm over time, but just want to mention the students who have been working on and the funding agencies, and thank you.
So, hi, it's a pleasure to be here. My name's Allie. I'm a Canada Research Chair in Digital Media Invention. This was already mentioned, so I'm not going to go over it. But what I'd like to talk about today, and it's going to be a little bit different from pretty much everything you've seen, because I'm a human-computer interaction researcher. And I always like to say that my lab is kind of data agnostic. So we work with complex problems in different fields, and we try to think about how we can build tools that allow researchers like you in migration studies to draw insights from that research and also to communicate the insights, for example, to policymakers. So I've titled my talk, Grasping Migration, and how tangible and embodied media can support data-driven discovery. And just to set the context, the slide that hopefully will come up if I click this button a few times, there we go, is I wanted to start with this painting. Because I think it's, so you're wondering why probably, because why would she show a painting by Joseph Wright of Derby from 1766? And the reason why is that I think this painting really nicely illustrates, at least for me, the importance of things that we can, artifacts, things that we can touch, that we can feel, that we can manipulate and share with each other. You see the people around it in the process of creating insights, in the process of learning and discovering things. And it really highlights for me the importance of the perceptual and motor systems in thinking and learning, because around this artifact, which is called an orrery, and it's basically a tangible artifact that that represents a model, the model of how the suns move, or how the planets move around the sun in our solar system. And the people around it, adults and children alike, are using it to grow their knowledge about this phenomenon. And nowadays we have a lot more data. So this is built obviously on observational data from the 18th century, but that data doesn't directly get into the model. The model is just built based on the data, based on the observations that people have made. And nowadays with computer technologies and digital information, we have the opportunity to use these same kinds of physical artifacts to directly connect to data and to bring people around that data in collaboration to draw insights. And I think that this is an opportunity also for the migration field in a variety of ways. So for example, in connecting and annotating data, also in exploring and analyzing data, in building models and informing policy, in storytelling and communication. And also there's opportunities in social and community engagement. I thought it was great this morning that one of the things that came up was the idea that people don't talk. I believe Gil mentioned it, that people don't talk in person and face-to-face anymore. And I like to think about technologies as, they tend to break us apart nowadays, but they're also opportunities to bring us together. So what I want to do today, and I know I have limited time, so it's going to be a bit of a whirlwind, but I'd like to show a range of projects. So while Bilal went deep, I'm going to go broad. And I want to show all kinds of, about 10 of them, they're shown on the slide, different projects that address these themes in different ways. Very few of them actually, only one of them at the moment, addresses migration research or migration data directly. But I think all of the others offer lessons and opportunities from the interaction and visualization perspective that we can draw from in the migration area. So I want to start with data exploration analysis, specifically data and exploration analysis that uses large multi-surface displays and what we call tangibles or tangible interaction. This is a setup that we have in my lab with a visualization wall and a tabletop computer. And what you're seeing on it right now is part of a collaboration with biology researchers, specifically my colleague from the biology department, Sarah Sabatinos. And we've been working together on how we can use this setup to visualize the experimental data that she collects from microscopy experiments and how we can bring researchers together in visualizing this data around the table. And a couple of things that have become clear to us as HCI researchers in this context is, one, Sarah always says that there's importance in singular events in her field, and these are often lost in aggregate sampling. So when you start to do statistical analyses, maybe you lose something really important. But human observation, when you actually go in and dive into the data and look at it, you can find those things in a way that the models currently, the statistical approaches, are not designed to do. And I've lost my water, so. So the large displays, which can show the detail of this data, really offer an opportunity for researchers to come together and inspect it themselves. And then potentially you can build in the algorithms that help with the analyses as well. Secondly, we allow researchers to bring their own mobile devices and interact with the data through tangible objects that they move around the table. So in this case, the mobile phone, so the data is online in the cloud, but the mobile devices also provide a way to access and authenticate data. So for security purposes, if you're accessing data that's your particular experiments or has privacy concerns, you don't have to worry that you're sharing things with the system broadly, but you're actually using a secure approach. And then lastly is about collaboration. So you see in the top right there, two researchers working together. And researchers also often come together to work, but often they also have to work separately and draw insights on their own. So one of the things that we've been exploring with this system is how you can bring together both loosely coupled collaboration, where they're able to look at the data independently, but also use interaction techniques to aggregate and integrate the data so that they can inspect it together. I have a short video clip, but I don't want to play the whole thing. So I just wanted to give you a really quick sense of what this looks like. So yeah, just at the beginning. So here you can see you've got the wall display, the table display, the mobile device, and two researchers are working together I wanted to show you what it looks like when you bring the data sets on the table. So they bring their device to the table, and here they're able to pull up. So in her case, these are DNA fibers from microscopy experiments. And I'm not going to go at all into the particulars of her research field, since that's not the point here. But so the researchers can bring these to the table, look at different data sets, and then as they move through the data and select data, they can throw them up on the wall where they get a much more detailed view. They can also where did my pointer go? They can also zoom them. Yeah, they can bring them down on the table, take a much closer look. And then lastly, they can, so using an integration tangible, they can actually move separate data sets together. And what happens now is the data sets are combined on the wall, so allowing you to compare across different experimental conditions and see differences and find patterns. So one of the things that, that tangible chromatin that we want to build in kind of as a next phase for the tangible chromatin project is actually starting to build models around the data, around the visualization, around the insights that you're drawing from the visualization. And the models currently aren't built into that particular system, but the models could allow testing hypotheses against the data that you're looking at. So in this project, we worked with systems biology labs at Georgia Tech in order to visualize and model biochemical reaction biochemical reaction networks. So you researchers at the table, so we've gone through multiple generations of the system. This project is actually wrapped up now. And in the first one, researchers were able to fit their model using tangible controls on a tabletop to large sets of experimental data. We then experimented with using tangible interactions for actually building and constructing the model. So that's what you see in the top right there, where thinking about somewhat, Watson Crick building the structure of DNA out of balls and sticks. So in this case, you can actually take two tangible objects, touch them together, and it creates a reaction between them. The math is generated in the background, but you have a tangible and visual representation that you can manipulate at the table. And then, like with the first system, you can load in experimental data and see how well the model fits the experimental data. And then in the third iteration of the system, we looked at what happens over time as you run multiple iterations of the simulation, and you see that the model fits in better or worse ways over time, and it gives you a sort of holistic picture of how the model fits to an experimental data set. Again, I haven't got time to show the whole video, but just to give you a very quick sense, I wanted to show the construction of the model. So as you bring objects together, in these cases, the tangibles are representing molecules in the system. So you can touch them together to create a reaction between them. And the tabletop visualizes the model in real time as it's being built. And then when you go a little bit further, so then when you run the simulation, you can actually test it against experimental data. And so you'll see the experimental data is loaded into the system, and this is how well the model is performing against the experiments that researchers are running in the wet lab. So taking those two ideas and bringing them into the migration concept, I wanted to talk about a project. This is actually spearheaded by Anna. It's called MEMO, and it looks at the drivers of migration. And we work with 3 different geographic systems in the world and try to understand migration from the perspective of what makes people move in 3 big categories: economic, social, political, demographic, and environmental. And I think a lot of what we learned on the previous projects with biological data can apply in the migration context as well, because geographic data is inherently spatial. The table and the wall are really great at showing a big spatial visualization of complex data. And the tangibles can provide controls for actually navigating and pulling up different layers of information. So you may have seen the demo that we have just outside here. Some of my students here have been showing a first visualization where we've pulled in data sets that include precipitation data as one of the drivers, and net migration in one particular region. So right now we have Ghana as well as Nigeria, so a couple of countries in West Africa. And I actually had a team of fabulous students this past semester that were working on some of the tangible designs at the tabletop. So some of them are here as well. And they came up with some of the concepts for how you can manipulate this data. So if you have many, many different data sets, potentially data sets that are growing and changing over time, how do you pull those up? How do you filter them, and how do you visualize them on the table? we've been working closely with the data scientists from the MEMO project and Circ Migration, looking at what are the right kinds of data and how do we align them temporally and spatially within the system. That is a huge challenge in and of itself. And then from our perspective, how do we design interactions around that that can bring this data and make it visual and tangible to the user? So the dial that the students work to design, you see it has 5 points for the 5 migration categories, and then you can dial it and select the particular driver, continue to dial, select the subdriver, and then those layers of information will show up on the table. And then you can start to understand relationships. So currently, just between precipitation and net migration data, you might be able to see, well, we saw a lot of precipitation in this particular region, and it looks like, you know, at the same period of time, a lot of people came to that region. So maybe people are coming there because of agriculture, and that's an opportunity, a job opportunity. So there's a driver that's environmental, but there's also a driver that's economic because of jobs. So one of the things that we're envisioning is similar to the pathway system that I just showed, is actually being able to construct this model, this network of drivers, and see and ask ask questions about the relationships and their effects. And what I should say is this is not an explanatory system, it's an exploratory system. So the idea is that you're looking to ask questions about the data, but we're not answering the questions as the researchers that are designing these visualizations. And the next phase is bringing in the qualitative data as well, because I think the qualitative data provide explanations for why we're seeing certain things within the quantitative data that we wouldn't know just from the quantitative data alone. And I wanted to share the video. This is the students in the course this semester came up with this concept for the MEMO system. And I think it's a really lovely illustration. It's still just a concept design at this point, but it illustrates nicely what some of the things that we want to build into the system as a next step. So again, using the table and visualization in the lab. And there you have the driver categories, the macro drivers. There, so you can visualize and zoom in on the tabletop and then move through the drivers. This is actually also shown on the display of the tangible as well, but in larger on the tabletop surface. And then this gives an idea, sort of concept design at this point, of being able to make connections as sort of hypotheses of relationships between drivers, and then investigate through both the quantitative and qualitative data to see actually if those are real. But again, that's not my field. We're the interaction and visualization designers. So I'm going to stop it there in the interest of time. Actually, no, I wanted to show one little bit. There's a great, just to show other types of visualizations. So the geographic spatial visualizations are one kind of visualization, but there are other ways that you might want to represent data in the system as well in order to inform understanding. So these were some of the concepts that the students came up with this term. Okay, so stopping there, I'm going to move. Oop. Okay, so the storytelling function in that, so the idea that you can actually create storied explanations that relate to the data ties into another longstanding theme in my lab called tangible narratives. And tangible narratives, so the idea is that we have a long history across cultures of using physical artifacts as a way to both collect and share stories. So this is a Lukasa board from the Luba peoples of the Congo region, and they were used to trace their history and their genealogy and their history. And they were created, handcrafted, and the person creating a particular Lukasa would encode information and meaning into the different elements of the Lukasa board, and then use it to actually perform the story and share it with community members. So my lab worked as part of this partnership between Africa and Atlanta and Georgia Tech, where we actually remediated the Lukasa board as a large tangible and digital tabletop. And then visitors at the museum were able to come and basically create their stories or construct their stories at the table and share them with each other. And we built up a repository over time. So one, both a kind of storytelling and practice and a way to elicit stories and information from people, which I think is relevant in the migration context, but also kind of like a data annotation tool in a really abstract way. I don't have time to show the video, I think, so I will just skip this, but, well, maybe I'll just give you a little second view of the annotation part. So you can kind of drag drag virtual beads to little icons to label bits of your story, and then you get these generated stories that appear on an adjacent wall, and all of this is collected into a large repository of stories over time. And so going on with that theme of data annotation, we're also working on training on building collaborative systems to train machine learning models. And trust came up as an issue this morning. And I thought this was really interesting because a lot of the approaches about engendering trust in AI are getting explanations of what the AI is doing. So why is the AI giving the particular insight that's giving? My lab is interested in how we engender trust by bringing people together with each other and with the AI as a partner at the table. So in this case, we bring a data scientist and a domain expert together at the table to collaboratively train a machine learning model in iterations where they're seeing at any point in time what the AI is thinking, and then they're kind of pushing back on it, saying, no, I think I should move this particular image to another node, or this image is in the wrong cluster, it needs to go over here, and then the model responds and that process keeps going. Because I'm running out of time, I'm not going to go into that project in any greater detail, but I wanted to get, because we've had a lot of conversations and Bilal showed some fabulous work on immersive environments, there's the idea that a lot of so everything I've shown so far has largely been 2D representations, modular 1 project. And there's a lot of opportunities, and sometimes the scale and complexity of data really require 3D space in order to visualize and make sense of it. So we have been working in this case with genomic data. So you're talking about the full sequence of the genome, 16 billion pieces of information across tens of thousands of patients and dozens of different cancers. And that really benefits from a mixed reality environment where you can make full use of the space around you and literally step into the data in order to understand it. So this is a system called MRGEM in our lab where, again, you're manipulating, you're exploring cancer mutation data. Haven't got much time, but just to give you a quick sense of the scale, you can see it in the lab here. So also mixed reality headsets are great in comparison to the tabletops. You can take them anywhere. So we're in the middle of the cluttered lab space here, and my RA is able to look up into the ceiling and see data on the ceiling, and also to expand it to pull out much greater complexity. So you saw aggregate data, and you're seeing hundreds and hundreds of patients stacked on top of one another looking for comparisons. So this I put in for Josephine. I don't think she's here, but virtual reality environments and mixed reality environments also have the ability or have potential for storytelling and for creating and engendering empathy. Maybe some of you watched 3 Body Problem, but it's kind of this creepy way where the alien race uses this advanced VR as a recruiting tool by basically trying to get humans to be empathetic with them. And my lab hasn't used, and there's a cognitive basis for this, using virtual environments to create empathy. And the cognitive basis is that we basically process the movements of others through our own motor system. And I see I only got 2 minutes left. So we process the movements of others through our own motor system. So basically, if I see someone slouching and sad, then I process that through, like my brain runs through the same process of what it's like to slouch and be sad. And then that makes me feel empathy toward the other. We've used it in a different context for spatial perspective taking. So trying to literally put somebody in spatial perspectives that they can't experience in the real world and see if it helps them imagine spatial perspectives better in their head. So I wanted to briefly show, this was a project that kind of going back to storytelling. Another way of engendering empathy is to bring people together and share different stories. This was the PhD work of a student of mine at Georgia Tech, Susan Robinson, and she built a mobile polling application that let people add rich media, like video explanations to her data, so that you could get a lot more information. And I think one of the key takeaways, and then she visualized it on a tabletop as well. One of the key takeaways from this project that I think is relevant here and was kind of raised this morning as well, is the fact that in the quantitative data, people would sometimes select, because of this polarized topic, we were talking the US health reform around 2012 or so, or before, And people would answer opposite things on the spectrum in the Likert questionnaire. But then when you listen to their explanation, it was very similar. So this was really interesting in the way qualitative data sometimes reveals things that's not in the quantitative data. The results may be completely opposite, but people actually have the same concerns about the issues. And so we need to bring them to the table together to talk about these so that they can actually see, well, look, you're responding in these different ways because of your political positions, but really you're worried about the same things in your day-to-day existence. So how can technologies help us have these conversations? This is the interactive table system. It was a collaboration with Turner Broadcasting. So we envisioned it as a communication tool for the broadcast studio. I won't show the video. We also have used it in the community planning context here at TMU. Again, I won't go into great detail, but I wanted to share as a very last project, just as an interaction technique. And this idea this morning, mobile devices mostly separate us, but we're looking at how mobile devices can bring us together. So in our SimSnap system, you can actually take your mobile devices and snap them together to create a larger display. This can have all sorts of different applications, from gaming to education to community planning. Just to end on a fun video here. You can see how you can bring these devices together very ad hoc and actually create one display. So there you go. So she snaps and devices go together. And then you can take an object and you move it from one screen to another. And again, so this is an interaction opportunity that I see as a way to kind of break down barriers between mobile devices that we see at the moment. I won't let that keep playing. So summarize, I've hopefully convinced you that these types of platforms and emerging interaction technologies can offer opportunities for migration research in a lot of different ways. It's been a bit of a whirlwind tour. In terms of next steps and opportunities, I think one of the key things is in my field is that it's essential for us to co-design around specific and data and problems, working with researchers and community members from particular areas. So for us, it's all kind of abstract until we ground it in a particular problem, particular data, or particular story. Another is lots of conversations about AI at this conference, and AI can be a partner at the table. How to do that in the right way, how to engender trust are important questions. So that's another one. Also, the question of how to put these tools into practice. So we build concepts and designs in the lab, but actually getting them into hands of people to use is a challenging question. We do try to leverage technologies that can scale. So all of the things that we build on the wall and tabletop in our lab are actually web-based. So you can open up in a browser on a regular laptop anywhere in the world, allowing opportunities for greater interaction, even if you don't have that wonderful wall and table setup. And how to generalize and scale. So thank you. This is all my fabulous postdocs and students who've worked on these projects, as well as our many research collaborators. Yeah, I think I'm the second talk, and I've probably run a bit over, so hopefully we'll take questions. Thank you very much.
Wow, I don't know about you, but I'm so inspired. Initially, I thought that what they were going to present was outside of my field, but I've been sitting there making all sorts of connections, even within psychology. And so thank you for your presentations and for really demonstrating for us the different ways in which we can bridge, physical and digital worlds. And I would add psychological worlds as well. And so because we don't have as much time, what I'm going to do is invite 2 questions from the audience, but I also want to encourage you they're very interesting people. I had an opportunity to start a conversation on this side here. And so I'm going to encourage you to actually meet with them outside, because you're going to be busy, but in order for you to have a more in-depth conversation with them or some of the questions that you might not have a chance to ask. So we'll take 2 questions from the audience. So we have one here.
Right. This reminds me of a very famous comment on the German gas workers program. We wanted workers, but we received people. So this is, the immigrants are not just the number in the statistics, the data, but they are human beings, right? They have needs and wants and challenges and so on. So I think it's, the question always asked, about AI and other advanced digital technologies that, can we using machine to develop empathy and and also the way how we can better learn from other people's behaviors, right? To be a good, better citizen, right, in a country. So this is something I don't know if it's possible, because a lot of time you talk about policies and talk about the, all those technologies, they don't fully understand, the human experience, the human sufferings, right? Even speaking of, labor market, for example, market forces can be very powerful in terms of increasing efficiency, but the market itself doesn't understand human sufferings. So I'm not sure whether we can do that.
Okay, so you're asking, can we solve human suffering yeah, and develop empathy and solve human suffering? In some ways, it follows up on the question from the earlier panel, can we address racism as an example of one area?
So it's a fascinating question. I think it relates to that 3-body problem slide and the VR stuff I showed. And empathy, like I said, is, at least from one perspective, and I'm not an expert in the field, but it's there is a basis in our perceptual and motor system in the way that we interact with the world. So the extent that a machine is going to be able to develop empathy, well, I don't think necessarily that it can, but in order for us to develop empathy with each other through a machine, then we have to be able to use the machine in a way that engages our perceptual and motor systems. So that's where VR comes into play. The challenge with VR is that it's not always realistic. So sometimes, like the uncanny valley effect, when you're using VR and you have AI agents that are generated, they often seem a little bit off. And then that's off-putting to the person who's trying to use them in some way. That's one of the reasons that in my lab, we tend to think of the technology less as, you're not interacting with the technology, you're interacting with each other around the technology or using the technology. And so what we've tried to do, for example, in our VR projects is to encode the movements of people's own bodies, represent those in the virtual environment, and use that as a way for then creating connection between people. The spatial perspective taking one I showed was a little bit different, but I think that is an approach to doing it. And I think Josephine brought up a great question at the Bridging Divides retreat last week, which was very much related to this. How do we use VR to create empathy, to tell stories and create empathy for people who've experienced very different situations in their lives? And I think one of the ways is in actually like using their own body movements, their own gestures in real time in the environment, as opposed to trying to encode it with, say, AI or something like that. Can the AI develop empathy? I don't know. I don't think. I'm skeptical. Let's put it that way. Maybe Bilal wants to add something.
I just want to add exactly that this replication of human behavior, that is more important than that mechanics or the physics that comes very in a discrete manner into the avatar. Or by discrete, I mean that it's not as natural and continuous as we are, and that is something that needs to be looked at from a replication point of view rather than generation point of view.
Yeah, I think also Jeffrey mentioned multiple times this morning, like the machine is only as good as the data that you put in it or the data that you're drawing from. And so the data sets that we're training our AI or machine learning systems on are inherently flawed because the data is always going to be inherently flawed, which is why my lab really tries to approach it from a human-computer interaction perspective, and the human is the essential part. And really, I like to think of it more as human-human interaction, and where is the computation? Maybe it's another partner at the table. It's human-human-computer interaction or something like that. I'm very much about what are the people doing and sharing together, and where does the technology support? And something else that I always say is, and this came up, I don't think we can get rid of technology. Like, we're not doing away with mobile phones, and we all know the challenges, and we see the challenges in our day-to-day lives of how it splits us apart, both in terms of our opinions and public debate, but also just in terms of our day-to-day interactions. But I do think that as designers who are envisioning the future, we have to think critically and ask, when do we want to use technologies? And this is coming from a computer scientist. Like, I don't want to use technology if I don't have to. I don't want a computational solution unless I need to have one. And so I think those are important questions to ask, and also important reasons to have these conversations in an interdisciplinary way to bring researchers both from CS, HCI, AI, engineering fields, and have them working together with those who come from public policy, from social sciences, from humanities, from philosophy, from disciplines where the real human experiences. After all, we're human, and in the end, we're trying to benefit humanity with all the technologies. So yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. So another question. Thanks.
Great presentation. And my question really is to ask, is there a complexity patch? So meaning we have, the simulations. It's very much based on data. I'm not sure whether, if we say a driver of migration is through precipitation, but then there can be a civil war happening at that point as well. So things can happen at the same time. And so I'm wondering, does that, were you able to uphold that, sort of complexity in that manner? And at the same time, in terms of, AR and say, transport, a complexity patch for me would be construction. Like if I am, trying to learn how to drive in Canada, or, I want to see how it is in the streets, but then I would view it as a clean slate because it's not so complex, right? Because we will be creating this environment with, I'd say less complexity, or maybe prove me wrong, maybe not. But then again, I'm wondering, can we add that complexity and that aspect, and then maybe we can do, I don't know, a round of forecasting as well in the end.
Maybe Bilal, would you be able to answer that? It relates to
So,
some of the
yeah.
questions of exposure.
So it's the kind of experiments that we do in VR in lab setting, that is where we can control the complexity, right? An experiment can be as simple as all the buildings are just blocks and the vehicles are blocks as well and moving, versus they can be very realistically represented with shades and reflections and all sorts of things, right? So the layers of complexity is something that is in our control, and we can introduce them as needed, right? Because whenever you are bringing in complexity, you are bringing in interaction effects, and because of that, you're making things more. There is an element of introducing biases and all sorts of things, right? So it's a matter of your design, the theory that is bringing in that design. All those factors need to be considered, and based on that, the level of complexity is introduced. And it's very much to your comment that do I need this, and should I bring it or not? So it always has to be the question related to whether this extra layer is needed or not, and what is the added advantage that it will bring.
Thank you. Is it okay? I'm just going to get somebody from our online, Radin, just so that they can participate in this conversation.
Sure. So we actually have a question here. It's from both Ali and Bilal about digital technology, and have you ever encountered user adoption or any resistance in adopting to the new technologies? And if it's yes, how do you think you can overcome this? And we know Ali kind of touched on building trust, but if there are other things that we can add to this. Thank you.
So a question about user adoption. Can you?
User adoption, delayed user adoption or resistance, and participating in such technologies.
Okay. I think a question is for you, Bilal.
I think there are various elements to this question. So, for instance, when a person is using VR for the first time, they are excited about that particular environment, tool, and their behavior is very different than taking it seriously as an experiment where they need to drive or they need to walk and so on, right? So and that would introduce a lot of bias in the data that we collect as well. So there's no systematic way to deal with this, but the way we deal with it is that we spend a lot of time in the acclimatization of a participant in that environment. So we just let them, okay, we don't give them any instructions, be in the VR environment. They can, walk around, they can experience it. We help them experience it so that wow factor, it's gone. And then, they can work with it. Then the other part is the technology adoption in their real life. So, I mean, it's, for instance, if you look at the driverless vehicles, there are all sorts of perceptions about it. There are safety perceptions, there are reliability perceptions. Some are early adopters, some are late adopters. So all this is something that we try to measure through perceptual questions, through their behavior in the experiments, and then try to accommodate them in our models. So yeah, that's the best we can do. Again, there are theories that we are able to use, but still there's always what we call error term that would not completely encompass the human behavior.
Thank you. I think I'm going to take, if that's okay, I'll take, there were 2 questions and then we'll go for lunch. So yourself and then Anna. Yeah.
Test. Okay. So first of all, it was not a question, but a comment. First, I'm really privileged to be in a space that has gained all this wisdom. So thank you very much. But I wanted to recognize the fact that in midst of all of this technology and human interaction, that we have some beautiful tulips.
Yeah.
And I would like to thank the people that put that together. And also to say that some of them are wilting. So that is the reality. So thank you.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you,
I
Cyrus.
noticed them as well. They're really beautiful.
Thank you, Cyrus. Having the benefit of having discussed these issues with each of you separately, I want to ask 2 questions that relate of how we can use these technologies in our migration research. So one question is for Ali. I know that the work that we're trying to do in the memo project, and I think Ali explained it, but just in case we're trying to see how different types of drivers, socioeconomic, cultural, environmental, political, etc., interact and produce migration. And I wanted to ask you, Ali, and the idea is that with these tools that Ali and her lab put in our disposal, we can open up our minds. So we had the data, we kind of did the classical statistical or geospatial analysis, and then we look at it in Ali's interactive table, and you try to think, does this make sense? And my question is whether in the work that you did with the biomedical scientists, does this make sense was different in your experience? Because I was thinking, again, for me, when you try to understand relations between 2 proteins, or a protein and a virus and a cell, that's positive sign that it's not a matter of perception. It either exists or it doesn't. Either those cells behave in this way or they don't. But when we do migration, for instance, we found in one part of the project, so we computed this data on Ghana, and we found that in northern Ghana, consecutive days of rain seem to provoke net emigration. And then we went to our colleagues from Ghana and said, what do you make of it? And they said, northern Ghana is less developed than southern Ghana, that is at the sea and has, more trade and is more industrialized. So, but again, it's in my view, much more about interpretation. So what we're trying to do now is that we're looking now into Nigeria, what stands out, and then try also to think outside the box. What if that's not the explanation? So that is my question to you, whether the 2 processes of discovering something new are different because the topic's different. And my question for Bilal is, and taking advantage of, if you remember an online conversation we had also with some other colleagues about the digital twins. And I learned from them that Toronto already has 23 digital twins, but they're each one is on the buildings, another is on the streets. If people don't know what is a digital twin, I didn't know until recently. And I understand that in Bridging Divides, what we will try to do is have a more complex digital twin.
And say, suppose taking the case of transportation, and obviously a newcomer, so communities in the city that have a higher percentage of newcomers. And so we're gonna look, say, at the buildings, you know, say the housing patterns, perhaps the employment patterns, age structure, transportation infrastructure, and then you're going to look at what, like stated, so basically actual preferences, say, of transportation, so how people use the TTC or their car, versus asking them what would be their preference. But then how are we going, because my question was, maybe there are implied preferences that we can, like, there is something there that I think maybe I'm taking the TTC every day, but maybe I'm taking the TTC because I found a job in downtown. But if I hadn't found a job in downtown, so how we're going to deal with that? Because that's the question of inequality in the city.
Is it okay? I'll have Bilal, you answer that first, and then Ali, you answer
Before I forget.
yeah, how you measure preference.
There are two elements to the digital twin itself, right? One is using it as a tool to observe participants' behavior in complex situations, right? So that is one element to it. But then the other element is, how can we use this for decision making, right? For answering what if questions, right? So the part where we are using it for understanding participants' behavior, that would be rather at a smaller scale. That would be at a scale as I showed a few examples, in the sense that just one street or one very small neighborhood, very confined, controlled environment, right? That's one thing. But then the more complex system that comes in, that, for instance, will have housing market, that hopefully should have labor market as well, that should have basic infrastructure systems like transportation systems, should have library systems, and so on, right? And then through the data that we collect, whether they are in digital twins or the revealed data, because we are also using smartphone apps to collect data. We build models that predict behavior, decision making in the sense that whether Anna is going to take a subway or not, connected to her housing location, connected to her work location. What if Anna's work location changes, right? So those sort of questions would be connected to how would their commuting behavior change, right? There's dimension of start time, end time as well, right? There's also question of accessibility to opportunities, right? So all these dimensions can be statistically calculated based on the simulation that is running behind digital twin. So whenever we think about digital twin, our general perception is that it's a 3D visual model, right? But it's much more than that. There's a back end to it where all these simulation mathematical models that are running. And so the second part, the main question that you had, that would be answered through the simulation and the mathematical models.
And so I'll be really quick.
Yes,
So
thank you.
just, I mean, as a very short answer, you're asking about between the similarities, or what I've observed as similarities or differences between the working with the biologists and the data that they collect versus working with the migration context. And I think the answer is that I see similarities and I see differences, but also between even just the two biological data projects. I showed three, I guess, but at least the first two, the one with more data exploration and the one with model building, I saw similar similarities and differences between those two projects. So I wouldn't say that it's necessarily between biological versus migration. I definitely agree that in the migration space, the data is much more open to interpretation. There's lots of different factors at play. And so that's why I keep saying we're not providing the answers. We're providing a platform that lets you explore and find questions. And maybe those questions might inform further data collection And then, maybe they may also inform or give ideas to policymakers on particular approaches that they might want to take with respect to migration. In the biology context, there were sort of two different things. The modeling labs, the systems biology labs that we worked with, had a very specific end goal in mind because they were doing bioengineering. So they wanted to create something like engineer a plant pathway to produce better biofuels. So they were looking for the best model, like how do we tweak this model to do this particular thing? So there is like a clearer answer in that case. But in Sarah's work, it is much more open-ended because she's looking at how DNA replication or abnormalities in DNA replication are implicated in the development of cancer or not, and how do different drugs change this. And that's a much more messy space where there are relationships, but they're not always clear. And that's why I think her work to me paralleled some of the visualization with the large and what she keeps saying about the importance of those singular events, but also not necessarily understanding why they happen. And so having the large volumes of data is important as well to be able to start to, and rather than finding an explanation through our system, she's able to find more questions that she can go and test in the lab. Like what is another study that I need to run based on what we looked at in the system? And that's kind of similar to the migration context. So again, differences and similarities.
Thank you. Well, thank you both for excellent presentation.